Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K309 The Stakeout. And I think this is one of those episodes where it's probably, I think it does end up being one of the better episodes from the book, in that it has probably the most interesting and intriguing information so far about the Red Lotus. But that is by virtue of being like the only time we properly get information about them. And the big thing for me with this episode is that it's not enough information. Given that this is the only time they decide to properly give us a little bit of an info dump on the Red Lotus and the characters, it doesn't do enough. And that's what I think will be the focus of a lot of my kind of criticisms with this episode, in that I like a lot of the points that they put in place for this plot and what's going on here. They just don't, for some reason the writers didn't feel it necessary to give more nuance to what's going on here. They didn't feel it necessary to, give us more information, given that we're fairly deep into the show at this point in time. There's only, 4 episodes left this book. We've only just found out the name of the organization that these characters are part of, and you're expecting this to kind of be this big monumental thing, and you leave off with this sort of mystery of like, okay, if they do capture Korra, what are they actually going to do with her? That's the mystery ongoing, and that reveal just ends up being completely like, okay, like kill her in the Avatar state. That's it. No, nothing fancy, okay. Because I think there was enough there to where like they could have made like a big kind of shocking reveal, because they have that Ordered White Lotus, Red Lotus connection. Like there could have been some crazy character reveal, something else that they did that could have like really changed things, but it doesn't really do enough or go enough places. The other thing with this episode is that before we even get to the Zaheer Korra conversation, I think the episode wastes a little bit too much time. It's a very similar problem to the end of The Terror Within, where both the last 7 minutes of that episode and the first 7 minutes of this episode are trying to do the same thing, but kind of just the different stages of the story. And that is Team Avatar trying to find Ai Wei, or Team Avatar staking out Ai Wei. I think they spend too long on this for what happens to Ai Wei in this episode, which is that he meditates into the spirit world, talks to Zaheer. Zaheer just sees him as kind of, having too much information out there that he's not in control of, and takes out Ai Wei. Ai Wei is killed here, and that whole thing is dropped. The whole Sue Ai Wei betrayal stuff from last time out is basically eliminated with this. And there's no real payoff to it at all. It's just, that was Ai Wei's use as a character, but here we have Zaheer Korra, which I appreciated in that we get to the most important scene in a way of the book almost, because of that. But it is a big waste of like someone you had just spent like the last episode setting up in Ai Wei. And I think with this episode, I like a lot of what they do in this kind of section, even though I think it is a little bit kind of slow. They didn't need it to be this long. I like a lot of the Team Avatar interaction that we get here, of just like Mako and Bolin going in on their own, them thinking they're being chased by bounty hunters, but them just being like autograph hunters, fans of Nuktuk. That was a fun little thing. When they're in the hotel room, Bolin and Asami playing Pai Sho. That's a fun little thing. I don't think it needed as much time as it did. There are a few too many shots of just time is passing. We're in a slightly different position. We've played Pai Sho, but all we're going to do is basically suggest that we've played Pai Sho like 17 times. It feels like they're wasting time when they don't have time to waste. That compare how much they have to get across in the Zaheer Korra scene compared to how little really happens in the first 7 minutes of this episode. And it's just kind of like, what are you doing with your time here? You've just spent so long, like you've almost spent like 14 minutes of full on-screen time getting to Ai Wei and finding out that he's meditating in this room and that the meeting's going to take place in the spirit world. But you only give a couple of minutes to the big reveal. Oh, at this point in the series, episode 9, the big reveal of what this organization is about. You only give it a couple of minutes, and it's just told through dialogue to us. No visuals whatsoever shown to add to it. I don't know what they were thinking with this one. I think at the time when this episode aired, we were happy just to get anything, but now this is made to look very like, why were they holding back on the information so much, given what happens, which is that we basically learn next to nothing beyond this about the group. But as I said, there are some fun character moments earlier on in the episode. You get a quick cut in it. There's another scene with Su Yin revealing what she did to Lin, that she actually told Team Avatar to go after Ai Wei, and Lin being obviously very upset about this. I like that Su Yin just came out and said it, didn't even try to hide it from Lin, but obviously Lin wants to get Korra back as soon as possible because she knows how dangerous this is. But that's just a really, really quick cut. It's fun. It was fun to see the Misty Palms Oasis again. That's another thing I will give to the first section of this episode. In that it was cool to see it now that the spirits are back, kind of like the big icicle in the middle, where they got all the stuff from, is kind of back. It looks more like it was before. It's a memorable location, and they kind of use it again quite nicely. They go into the bar initially, and I like that they have the wanted posters up on the walls, and that it makes sense that there is a wanted poster for all of these characters because they've all been arrested at some point in the series. Korra, all the way back in like the first episode, was arrested. That's where her mugshot comes from. Mako's been arrested twice in the series. They used the secondary one, which is when he was arrested for the whole apparently stealing from Asami, the Sting episode. That's why his picture looks the way it does. And then Asami and Bolin were both arrested with Mako by Tarlok. So that's where all the kind of police pictures in a way come from, which I like that they kept the continuity well on that. It's fun to see spirits just around the place and that it's seemingly a spiritual location. I wish this is sort of where like I'm not really sure what the creators were thinking when they went from like Korra's big speech at the end of book 2. Spirits are in the world, new era. I think they over-focused on the fact that harmonic convergence brought airbenders back, and just I think really did ignore that spirits are back in the physical world until like right at the end, and now sort of we're still lingering on that where we are in the comics. I get the impression that almost the writers don't even consider it to be as big of an issue as it should be. In that most spirits, it seems like it's fine, but there's definitely a sense of them sort of being like a nuisance, and there not being a lot of communication between humans and spirits. But it's not a focus of this episode. The focus is just meant to be that the spirits are actually trying to get across to Korra and Asami that the meeting, actually, this place is in the spirit world. It's not actually on the map of the physical world. And that was a fun little reveal when it happened, which was cool to get. The whole Nook Tuk poster signing, fun to just get that reference. Similarly, Bolin being pretty fun, actually, early on in the episode with the whole disguises thing and coming up with this whole crazy backstory for himself, and then expecting Mako to do the same, but him being just as impressed with the fact that he feels that Mako is playing the character just by saying, I'm a cop, I don't have a backstory. And I suppose it's a little bit of a sense of a setup for that. Bolin is interested in police work. He thinks it's really cool, but is overly enthusiastic, and it seems like it doesn't suit him. So it's interesting that in the comics now, they're actually a duo. Like Bolin is now a kind of police officer as well. I'm not sure how much of a setup it's meant to be, but it's just an interesting point to look at given where they are now. So yeah, I suppose at this point it's time to get into the big Korra Zaheer scene. Um, the thing with this is that I think a lot of what's said here is interesting, but because it's not given any extra depth, it's just kind of presented to us. I think it's very easy to sort of like dissect and rip apart to the point where it's like, this is so underdeveloped, like there's nothing really here. In that, what actually happens in this scene? We find out they're called the Red Lotus. Okay. We get like the Unalaq reveal. Unalaq's also Red Lotus. That explains the stuff from before. The connection between Unalaq apparently trying multiple times to, be close to Korra or take her in some way. The kidnapping attempt. Okay, that makes sense. They explain that the idea then, why it was a kidnapping attempt and not like a attempt to kill, was that they wanted to kidnap her, train her as the Avatar, but Red Lotus style instead of Order of the White Lotus style. Cool. Very, very cool. But again, show us that scene. Because you really begin to notice when you get close-ups on Zaheer's face here like that, he has like a cut through one of his eyebrows. Like, where did that come from? It hasn't happened in this book, so that must, more than likely, be from the attack, the attempt to kidnap Korra from before. Who did that to him? It would make sense that it would be Sokka, the only person there really who would use a bladed weapon of that group. Could be Tonraq as well, with some ice maybe doing it. But like Sokka or Tonraq, it makes sense. But I'm not, obviously the scar I don't think is meant to be overly emphasized on Zaheer's kind of character design, but it's something that would really add to what's going on here. Like, imagine if we got the reveal that that was how Sokka died. He died in this defense of Korra. And that's another thing that adds to her kind of how upset she is about that situation, which led to her having to be trained in the Avatar as the Avatar in a completely different way, and it also led to the death of one of the original members of Team Avatar. Like, if they had done something like that, covered what that reveal was, that adds so much more to what happens in this book. You would allow us to set up what were the matchups in that original fight. Who did Zaheer fight? Who did Pali fight initially? Who did Ghazan fight initially? That's why I was very critical earlier on in this book of the Tonraq, Zuko, Eska and Desna versus the Red Lotus fight. In that, like, you have history with these, but like you're treating them so much as a group, you're taking away some of the individuality of the members of the group just by doing that. Like, did Zuko fight Ghazan before? If so, why does he get taken out so easily by Ghazan now, when Ghazan doesn't even do anything fancy? And everything else is like, okay, what is the fundamental ideal of this villain group? That's the thing with Korra. The focus of each book, each plot, is around the villain. They are like the key thing that is like a thing you can focus on to really get an idea about what the book is about. So the Red Lotus is our villain this book. What is their ideology to sort of give us our theme for this book? They say freedom, but it really ends up being more like chaos is sort of like the theme, because that's what they're about. We get the reveal that what Unalaq was doing in book 2 wasn't just like his own goal. Dark Avatar was his own goal. That was him kind of going off script. But that the Red Lotus fundamentally has their goal has always been that they want to free Vaatu and bring chaos into the world. That's what they're about. It happens to also be this sort of secondary thing where they hate world leaders and want the world to live in its quote-unquote true state, that being that there is a order in disorder, that the natural order of things is that it's meant to be disordered and chaotic. I think that statement, him just saying that, and then I like that Korra does later call it kind of like philosophical mumbo-jumbo, because I think the Red Lotus's ideals is the most like difficult to get behind. It sounds like they're saying something kind of deep and meaningful that you can sort of wrap your head around, but it's pretty crazy when you actually like think about it, that like their idea is to just, in a world that is structured, that has all these leaders in place and stuff like that. Okay, you want to change that in some way. You don't start the change by just taking out the people who are ruling it, because you just, you end up just kind of hurting the people who like are sort of stable because of that structure, and like the people who benefit from it are like the Red Lotus, because they're the only ones who are like prepared for the chaos that's really about to happen. And it's just, that's why Korra just has nothing. Like she does not really buy into what Zaheer is saying at all, in terms of like when he talks about his ideology, she just completely dismisses it, which I appreciate. That's in character for Korra, but I think it's the writers also acknowledging the fact that, okay, this is what we want the villains to be about, but like we can't really come up with a positive for Korra to have with this. Korra can see some positive in bringing spirituality to the world from Unalaq. She can see that there is some imbalance between benders and non-benders from Amon. She's not going to do the full extreme thing like the villains are, but she can learn something from dealing with that villain. Here, they try in book 4 to make it out that she learns something about freedom, but does she? And I think that's ultimately the problem with these villains, is that what you get out of them, the net positive from them, you get a lot of really, really, really cool fights. They set up the book 4 villain. But that's it. I don't think Korra learns anything from these villains. We don't learn anything from them as villains. The lore, the information potential from these villains is left completely unfulfilled because they don't delve into the group individually. And this is where the weakness comes in here. Up until now, it's just this vague group. Like, Zaheer is the leader, but it's just 4 people. This is the book that defines them as a group who are part of this organization. And it's at this point, we don't know anything about them all individually. You've decided to treat them just as a group. And this becomes the problem with these 4. Like, now that you've introduced the Red Lotus, they're only going to be referred to as a group. And suddenly, you give no real way to delve into each of the characters individually. And we see by the end of this book that 2 of them especially, but more or less all 4 of them, do not get the focus that they need to really stand out as characters outside of their bending abilities and kind of how threatening they are. That's the one thing you can always give the Red Lotus, in that they give them the really extreme kind of action scenes. They are characters who will never back down from something. They'll always kind of commit to it fully, and that's cool. But again, imagine how meaningful, imagine how powerful so many of these scenes would be if we actually knew the characters. We knew why they were part of this organization, what drove them to join it, why they believe so strongly in it to the point where they'll kill world leaders over this, why they want to get rid of the Avatar for good. Imagine we knew that for each of these individual members, and we played on that fact. As it is, we just kind of learned they're about freedom, roughly, and it just makes them all seem like kind of crazy people, that they're part of this organization, that they actually want Vaatu to take control of the world, that they want to kill all the world leaders, have Vaatu roughly there leading thing, some level of like Unalaq's plot is incorporated into theirs. And it's just, it feels very like ill thought out on kind of all fronts, from the writing perspective, even just from the characters themselves. Like, admittedly it was the whole Dark Avatar thing that sort of was where Unalaq miscalculated, but Vaatu just full stop, like, is he really going to allow you to just exist in a place where like you'll be happy with? I don't think so, and this is the major problem we get from this, is that this is the only time we delve into them as a group, an organization, and there's not enough information revealed about them. Is the kind of net sum of this. Like, all they say about the Red Lotus is that it's a spin-off from the Order of the White Lotus. The founder is this guy called Xiaobei. They've named the place in the spirit world after him, where the spirits seem to have like accepted this to a degree. You know, he even says like the Guru Lahima quote to Korra, and she has a bit of a reaction that like an airbender said something like this, that like, you need to get rid of like what came before to kind of change things. And it's just kind of like, okay, but like what are we really meant to take away from that? Like, of course she's going to have a shocked reaction that an airbender said something controversial, but the fact that we don't really know Guru Lahima, I think, is a problem. Like, Did you need to go full flashback on Guru Lahima? No. But I think he's such an important part to, like, Zaheer and what Zaheer is trying to do. You probably should have at least given us, like, a substantial, to a degree, like, idea about Guru Lahima. Instead, it's just, here's some lines of poetry from Guru Lahima, who everyone seems to know, and here's a shocking thing that he said, that, you know, he's a respected airbending guru, but let's just ignore this controversial thing he said. It feels like there was something missing with Zaheer, that they were meant to establish where his interest in airbender culture, or poetry, or whatever came from, and they just never did. Because like the flight, like some of the stuff that comes from Lahima works. It's just then like it feels similar to Jiaibao, where it's this kind of legendary figure who you don't go into enough to really have the kind of gravitas of what's going on really come across. In that, like, what really did the Order of the White Lotus do that was wrong? Like, it almost comes across as being very, very petty on their parts. That, like, okay, your interpretation of it is that, you know, in the aftermath of the 100-Year War and stuff like that, the White Lotus came out of hiding, they actively served the Avatar openly, and you disagree with them because they sort of lost what they were as, like, being special, individual, hidden, and only became glorified bodyguards, which has been sort of gotten across in the appearances we've seen of them. But a lot of that would come down to the fact that the show has never really delved into what the Order of the White Lotus is at this point. They treated it seriously in Avatar. They haven't here. They've established, like, it's been clear that they're, like, responsible for the training of the Avatar, but they've never gotten across, like, who are the leaders of the White Lotus at this point in time. And this is where something as simple as, like, is Zuko part of the White Lotus? We don't know. He's leading them, apparently, but is that because he's just well respected and is sort of somewhat involved through Iroh? I'm not sure. And that's another thing. Like, that was seemingly a big plot point early on. Like, the White Lotus were in a lot of the early episodes. Similarly with Zuko, but they've fallen away ages ago. And they sort of bring it back here a little bit, but the Red Lotus going forward never focused on the White Lotus after this point. And it's not that the White Lotus have been defeated for good, the organization is ruined or anything like that. They're just not focused on. So you take away their immediate rivalry, and you don't really have them, like, try to actively take out their enemies. In that they just leave Zuko there when they probably could have taken him out if they wanted to. They were in Republic City earlier on. They probably could have taken out Raiko if they wanted to. It's just like, what are they really doing with them? And I get it, like they're planning things out. There's a bit of intelligence to this group, of course. And they're building up to the fact that the death of the Earth Queen in the next episode is going to be the really big thing. That's what the end of this episode is doing. Korra and Asami are captured by the Earth Queen, and Mako and Bolin are captured by the Red Lotus. They're going to all come together, and the result is that the Earth Queen's going to be killed, Ba Sing Se is going to be in chaos, the Earth Kingdom's going to be in chaos, and that's going to be the kind of lasting legacy of the Red Lotus. But we'll see how, like, does a big scene where they do something kind of crazy, somewhat unexpected, the show does something kind of over the top, like killing a character when it hasn't really shown death all that clearly before, does that alone kind of get around the fact that there's all these other problems that the group has? We'll talk about that next time out. But here, it just... I look back on this book, given that it doesn't do anything else, and this scene feels a little shallow, Korra and Zaheer. It still has some impact because it is one of, like, two main scenes, really, where, like, Korra and Zaheer properly have a conversation. It's like this one and their book 4 conversation. Because everything else after that is more of just, like, kind of hero-villain dialogue of just, like, you know, having them be at conflict with each other. They're the only two times where you really get to see the two kind of present, like, actual points of view. I think I've said it before, but I feel that Zaheer's book 4 appearance is my favorite Zaheer scene. I think he's much better there than he is here, because it forces him to acknowledge that sort of his actions in book 3 were foolish. The fact that, you know, of course someone was going to try and step in to get rid of this chaos that was going on. Like, you created a tyrant. How did you not realize that you would do that? So it's one of those ones where, like, what is the real net benefit from what we learn in this episode? We get this potentially cool organization in the Red Lotus, but we never get enough depth on it to, I think, truly make it really all that on par with what, like, the legendary Order of White Lotus is from Avatar. In that we know Boomy, we know the old masters from that group. And they're trying to accomplish something similar here with the Red Lotus. Individual characters with specific skill sets, part of this kind of group that has an ideology. The problem is they forgot character, they forgot personality in that. And you have, like, amazing characters in, like, Iroh, Boomy, you know, Piandao, and then you have kind of almost blank slate characters in this group. And that's where it doesn't work as well. And especially with along since then, what have you done to the White Lotus? You've turned it into a bit of a joke, which you tried to use as the origin story for the Red Lotus, but because you don't explain it enough, it's kind of hard to just be like, okay, the White Lotus lost their way, so we formed the Red Lotus. Okay, and again, I think in a way one of the net benefits from this is actually, I think Unalaq benefits more from this discussion in terms of adding more to his character than the Red Lotus individual characters do at all. Like, I really don't think you learn anything personally about this group, because Zaheer never explains, like, why he believes in this or anything like that. And that you don't get the personal real reason behind a lot of this, and especially with the other three you don't. Whereas at least with Amon's backstory, you get why a bender would be anti-bender because of his backstory. With Unalaq, you get why someone so spiritual would do something as crazy as he did in book 2. Here it's like, you believe so much in freedom, the lack of world leaders, that you're going to kill world leaders, cause, like, near irreversible things to happen in the world, kill this legendary figure of the Avatar, all because your organization's ideals are that. And I don't know how much of it is Zaheer himself, maybe changing the ideals as the current leader, or what, because they sort of lose track a little bit within this group, the difference between them being part of this organization that has ideals and then the individuality of the characters. In that it feels like what they tried to develop is the group, but not everything that with the group applies to the characters, and they sort of lose track of that a little bit. So while it ends up, I think, being one of the more memorable scenes from book 3, it's also one of the ones where I think it's just a scene that is worthy of some praise, but also a lot of criticism at the same time, because it's the scene that ends up feeling that, like, here's this relatively weak attempt to give all of the information we need on these characters, and it's not good enough. What happens after that is Minghua and Ghazan arrive at the Misty Palms Oasis, and we basically get the plan where Asami is going to take Korra on Naga to try and escape. They get captured by the Earth Queen, and Mako and Bolin are going to hold off Minghua and Ghazan. And we get the fights matchup. This is a cool part of the book. I like this, that they, at this point, decide, when we get into the big final fights, we want there to be kind of individual rivalries between these characters. So, okay, Korra Zaheer makes sense. Bolin, Ghazan. Okay. Or the two earthbenders against each other. Bolin had previously in the last episode made a comment about how cool lava bending was. That's cool to see if Bolin, who's been more or less one of our best earthbenders we've seen in the series up to now, against this kind of crazy lava bender who can also do earthbending. Cool matchup. Then Minghua versus Mako, firebender versus waterbender, always a cool fight. added to by the fact that Minghua obviously has a very unique style because of her because she doesn't have arms and uses water arms. And then I think the big thing with all of this is that, okay, Mako and Bolin lose their individual fights, but they put up a good fight. So like it's even enough. But the factors in both of their fights are this. Bolin's arc currently is that they're setting up that he may learn metal bending at some point. And if he learned metal bending, that could turn the tide of his fight against Gazan. They obviously take a different approach with that, and it works out really nicely. And we'll get to it. So just that's going to be a fun one to get to. And then with Mako, we know he can do lightning. And just any analysis of Minghua's technique is that she literally, to use her powers, has to have water attached to her body always. She doesn't really tend to do much water bending where she's just manipulating it from a distance. And because of that, lightning is her complete weakness. And Mako didn't use it in this fight. That was something I latched onto immediately when this episode aired. Mako didn't use lightning, and lightning looks like it would be perfect to take out Minghua. Ends up being completely true. But the matchups, I think, really do work. And then what they end up getting to is that like it's the sisters. It's Lin and Sue against Pali, which it sort of set it up from before. Pali was, I suppose, the major factor that the Terror Within fight was sort of based around. Sue and Lin kind of dived in on top of her. And we sort of avoided that fight because Bolin kind of intervened. But, it's not the best setup there, but it's going to be an important factor in the coming episodes. But they set that up well, and then it is a shocking reveal that like you sort of think like has Gazan stopped them somehow, like what's going on here, and the reveal that Korra has in fact been captured by the Earth Queen is like the return of the character into the series after like a bunch of episodes just not with her at all. I think it's a somewhat shocking reveal that she's been captured in this way, and it's meant to bring everyone together, that everything's going to converge on Ba Sing Se again with the Earth Queen, and obviously her death is going to be the key factor in all of this. So it ends up coming together like reasonably nicely, but I just can't overly praise this episode because there's so much more information that's needed on the Red Lotus to have me like super praise what's going on here. But it's definitely not like the worst episode at all. Like I do honestly feel that of the more Red Lotus kind of plot centric episodes, it is one of the best ones that we have here because it is the one to give us information. It's just not enough information. So that's my thoughts on this episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the Stakeout. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.